You know what's absolutely wild? The most important position in modern football literally didn't exist for the first 17 years of the sport. Like, imagine watching a Premier League match right now, but there's just nobody in goal. Both teams. Just an empty net sitting there like a sad, forgotten shopping cart. I'm not even kidding. When football was first invented, the idea of having someone whose entire job was to stand in front of the goal and stop shots was considered totally unnecessary, ridiculous even. And honestly, when you actually dig into why, it kind of makes sense. Kind of. In a weird Victorian England sort of way. So buckle up, because the story of how goalkeepers became a thing is genuinely one of the strangest rabbit holes in sports history. And it involves everything from British aristocrats making up rules while drunk, to teams literally arguing about whether touching the ball with your hands should be illegal, to one absolute madman who changed the entire sport because he decided to just stand in the goal. That's it. That was his revolutionary idea. Let me paint you a picture of football in the 1860s. First of all, it barely even looked like football. There were literally dozens of different versions being played across England, and every school, every town, every random village had their own rules. It was chaos. Beautiful, confusing chaos. At rugby school, you could pick up the ball and run with it. At Eton, you absolutely could not touch the ball with your hands under any circumstances. At Cambridge, they had this weird hybrid version where you could catch the ball, but only to immediately kick it. Some places had goals that were like 9 feet wide. Other places had goals that were basically the width of a modern highway. And the number of players? Forget about it. Sometimes it was 11 versus 11. Sometimes it was 30 versus 30. Sometimes it was just whoever showed up that day. But here's the thing that's absolutely crucial to understand. In almost all of these early versions, the emphasis was on dribbling and running with the ball. Defense wasn't really a concept yet. Like, teams didn't sit back and defend. That would have been considered cowardly, unsporting. The entire point was to attack, attack, attack. Both teams just charged forward like two armies meeting in the middle of a battlefield. So in that context, having someone stand in goal doing nothing, totally pointless. Why would you waste a player just having them stand there when everyone else is having all the fun up the field?
The Football Association was founded in 1863, and this is when things start to get interesting. A bunch of guys from different schools and clubs met up at the Freemasons Tavern in London to try and agree on one unified set of rules. And let me tell you, these meetings were heated. The main argument wasn't even about goalkeepers, though. It was about whether you should be allowed to hack someone's shins, trip them, or just straight up punch them to get the ball. I wish I was making this up. There were genuinely people arguing that football should include the right to physically assault your opponents. The rugby school guys were particularly passionate about this. Eventually, they agreed on a set of rules that became known as the laws of the game. And you know what those original rules said about goalkeepers? Absolutely nothing. Not a single word. There was no mention of a goalkeeper position at all. The rules just said you couldn't touch the ball with your hands unless you were catching it for a mark, which was this weird rule borrowed from rugby, where if you caught the ball cleanly, you got a free kick. But here's where it gets even weirder. The rules did say that any player could use their hands to knock the ball down if it was coming at them in the air. So technically, everyone was a goalkeeper, or nobody was. It's honestly hard to say. So matches in the 1860s and early 1870s looked completely insane by modern standards. Picture this. No offsides rule worth mentioning, no designated goalkeeper, goals that were just two posts with a tape across the top but like 8 feet high, and teams playing this ultra-aggressive style where everyone just swarmed forward. Scoring was actually pretty rare though, which is the ironic part. You'd think without goalkeepers, every match would end like 47-43 or something, but nope. Most games ended 0-0. Or maybe 1-0 if you were lucky. Why? Because the ball was this heavy, waterlogged leather nightmare that was nearly impossible to control. Trying to score from distance was like trying to kick a bowling ball. And since everyone was crowded in the middle of the field fighting for the ball, there wasn't much room to maneuver anyway. But slowly, teams started to figure out that maybe, just maybe, having someone hang back a bit could be useful. Not in goal necessarily, but just someone who stayed behind the swarm to cover any breakaways. This defender could use their hands to knock down any through balls, and gradually, that defender started positioning themselves closer and closer to the goal line.
Now, nobody knows for sure who the first actual goalkeeper was, like the kind of goalkeeper we'd recognize today. Someone who just planted themselves between the posts and made it their mission to stop shots. But most historians point to a guy at a club called Royal Engineers in the early 1870s as being one of the first. And here's the thing that absolutely blows my mind. When teams started actually using dedicated goalkeepers, other teams thought it was cheating, like genuinely unsporting behavior. There are records of matches where one team would show up with a goalkeeper and the other team would complain to the referee that it was unfair and cowardly. Can you imagine? Excuse me, sir, but the other team has positioned a player in front of their goal and we feel this gives them an unfair advantage in preventing us from scoring. It's like complaining that the other team's defenders are trying too hard. But it worked. Teams with goalkeepers started winning more. Shocking, I know. And slowly, reluctantly, everyone else had to adapt. The rules officially acknowledged goalkeepers in 1871. Sorta. The new rules said that no player could handle the ball except for the goalkeeper, who could use their hands within a specific area near the goal. But even then, it was vague and poorly defined. The goalkeeper wasn't really a position yet. It was more like a special privilege that one player got. And the area where they could use their hands, that wasn't defined at all until 1912. Can you believe that? For 41 years, goalkeepers could basically handle the ball wherever they wanted in their own half. There are stories of goalkeepers in the 1890s who would catch shots near their goal and then just run forward with the ball in their hands like it was rugby until they got close enough to the opponent's goal to throw it to a teammate. Imagine Allison or Ederson just picking up the ball and sprinting to the halfway line with it tucked under their arm. The chaos, the absolute scenes.
Here's another thing that nobody tells you. Early goalkeepers were completely unprotected. And I don't just mean they didn't have gloves and pads. I mean that the rules explicitly allowed forwards to barge into the goalkeeper, even if they didn't have the ball. You could just run full speed at the keeper and shoulder check them into the goal. It was legal, encouraged even. There's this famous match in 1878 where a goalkeeper for Royal Engineers got absolutely demolished by an opposing forward, like completely taken out. He was so injured he couldn't continue, but there were no substitutes back then, so his team had to just continue without a goalkeeper for the rest of the match. They lost 5-0, which, honestly, they probably got off easy. This kind of thing happened all the time. Goalkeepers were basically human punching bags, and you couldn't even really blame the forwards because that was just how the game was played. If you wanted to score, you went through the goalkeeper, literally. It wasn't until 1894 that the rules were changed to protect goalkeepers from being charged unless they had possession of the ball. But even then, if they were holding the ball, you could absolutely wreck them. That rule didn't change until 1903. Let's talk about the penalty kick for a second, because this is relevant and also completely bonkers. The penalty kick was invented in 1891, and it was controversial as hell. People genuinely believed that gentlemen footballers would never commit a foul so serious that it deserved such a harsh punishment. The idea that a player might deliberately trip an opponent in the penalty area? Unthinkable. Offensive to suggest. They called it the death penalty because it was considered such an extreme punishment.
A direct shot at goal from 12 yards out with only the goalkeeper to beat? Basically a guaranteed goal. Might as well just award the goal directly, some people argued. But here's the thing. When penalties were first introduced, goalkeepers could move forward off their line as much as they wanted before the ball was kicked. There was no rule keeping them on the goal line. So you'd have these penalties where the goalkeeper would basically charge at the penalty taker like a rabid dog the moment the whistle blew. It was chaos, absolute chaos. Sometimes goalkeepers would sprint so far forward that they'd nearly reach the penalty spot before the kicker could shoot. Penalties in the 1890s must have been wild to watch. That rule got changed pretty quickly, but it just goes to show how nobody had really thought through what having goalkeepers actually meant for the sport.
The evolution of goalkeeping as a skill is its own fascinating journey. See, early goalkeepers were just regular players who happened to stand in goal. They didn't train specifically for it. There was no specialized technique. You just tried to stop the ball with your face, if necessary. The first goalkeeper to really treat it as a specialized position was probably William "Fatty" Falk, who played in the late 1800s and early 1900s. And yes, his nickname was really fatty. He weighed like 280 pounds, which for the Victorian era was absolutely massive. He was literally too big for most forwards to knock over, which made him incredibly effective. But Falk was also known for doing these theatrical dives and showing off. He'd catch the ball one-handed and hold it up to the crowd. He'd argue with the referee. He'd talk trash to opposing forwards. He basically invented the personality-driven goalkeeper that we see today with guys like Neuer and Alisson. Before Falk, goalkeepers were mostly just standing there. After Falk, goalkeeping became a performance, a show. And that changed everything. Goalkeeper gloves didn't become a thing until the 1970s, by the way. For the first 100 years of the position's existence, goalkeepers just used their bare hands, in the rain, in the snow, catching those heavy leather balls that would get heavier and heavier as they absorbed water. Some goalkeepers in the early 1900s would rub resin on their hands for grip. Others would spit on the palms. Some would just deal with it and hope for the best. The idea of wearing gloves was considered soft and unnecessary. Real men caught balls with their bare hands, apparently. When the first goalkeeper wore gloves in a professional match in England in the 1970s, people mocked him, called him weak, said he was babying himself. Now you'd never see a professional goalkeeper without gloves. Funny how things change. Here's something that'll mess with your head. The back pass rule. You know how goalkeepers can't pick up the ball if their own teammate passes it back to them? That rule didn't exist until 1992. 1992! Before that, defenders would just pass the ball back to their goalkeeper whenever they were under pressure, and the goalkeeper would pick it up and hold it for as long as they wanted. Some goalkeepers would just stand there with the ball in their hands for like 30 seconds, waiting for their team to get into position. It was incredibly boring to watch. The 1990 World Cup was so defensive and dull, with endless back passes to the goalkeeper, that FIFA finally changed the rule. And that one rule change revolutionized modern football. Suddenly, goalkeepers needed to be good with their feet. They needed to be comfortable playing as a sweeper keeper. They needed actual technical skills beyond just shot stopping. That's why modern goalkeepers like Ederson and Alisson are so good at passing. They grew up in an era where if you couldn't use your feet, you couldn't be a top-level goalkeeper. But for 130 years before that, goalkeepers barely needed to kick the ball at all.
So why didn't early football have goalkeepers? Because the game wasn't designed with defense in mind. It was designed as an attacking sport where everyone charged forward and the ball was so hard to control that scoring was rare anyway. Putting someone in goal seemed like a waste. But once teams started getting better at passing and controlling the ball, once the game evolved beyond just a swarm of players kicking at a heavy leather blob, suddenly having someone dedicated to protecting the goal made sense. And once it made sense,
it became necessary. And once it became necessary, it became the most specialized, most protected, most important position on the field. The goalkeeper went from not existing at all to being the only player who can use their hands, who has their own special area on the field, who wears a different colored jersey, who has their own unique set of rules. They went from an afterthought to the foundation of how football is played. And it all started because some guy in the 1870s decided to just stand in the goal. That's it. That was the innovation. Standing still. And everyone else was like, wait, that's actually genius. Football is weird, man. The biggest innovations sometimes come from the simplest ideas. And the things we think are essential and obvious now, somebody had to invent them. Somebody had to be first. Somebody had to be the weird one doing something different while everyone else mocked them for it. The goalkeeper is just the most extreme example of that. A position that went from not existing at all to being completely indispensable in less than 2 decades. All because some Victorian footballers realized that maybe, just maybe, leaving your goal completely undefended wasn't the best strategy. Revolutionary stuff, truly.